out of the way at Monmouth, and then had planned to transfer to the University of Missouri to specialize in journalism. And at the time, I wasn't too sure it was sports journalism. I was just interested in writing. Well, at a small college like Monmouth, which had an enrollment of about 500 kids, I ended up as the sports editor of the newspaper, the sports editor of the yearbook. I wrote for the local newspaper. I did stringing for other area newspapers as well. So I was doing a lot of writing, but I also, when the radio station was put on the air, I took a copy of one of my stories over to them to see if they would be interested. And the guy who was on the air at the time happened to be the owner of the radio station, and he said, I don't know a thing about sports. Why don't you go in there and pull some stuff off the wire and see if you could put together a 5-minute sportscast and to do it for me at 5:25. So I did. I went in and did a 5-minute sportscast, came back into the control room, and he said, how'd you like a job? And, of course, I said, holy cow, the next Vin Scully has been born, and that's not what he wanted. He wanted a janitor, and that's what he hit me with the other part. He said, you might in time turn out to be a pretty good sports announcer, so, if you want to do the sports, that's what I'll take one of those dollars away from you because you're learning to be a sports announcer on the station. But, hey, it all worked out just fine.
Yeah, WRAM, the pride of prime beef country, right?
Right, the prime beef, what was it now? WRAM, the pride of prime beef county. Yep.
But it's funny, to hear those stories and see how all that. I'm telling you, I had as much enjoyment reading those early stories. I don't know, Cleveland, of course, we all know it's a blue-collar, hard-working city, and I guess you could really, at least I personally, can relate to the hustling, really, which is what you were doing, just putting your nose to it and making it happen. And I think that's seeing where it ended up. When you think about it, that's some pretty interesting stuff, man.
A true testament of just hard work and perhaps even, not to cheapen it, but being in the right place at the right time.
Making yourself there.
Exactly. Creating that opportunity where one doesn't exist.
Guys, I kind of want to go into the beginning levels of the Cavs, because you, especially you, Brett, you're very young. I don't think you understand when he says how bad those initial Cavs team. I think you're not equating that on the right level. We're talking pretty much as bad can be. Am I right, Joe?
Well, they started off losing 15 straight, and then they won one, and then they lost 12 straight, then they won one, and they lost 9 straight. So if you add that up, it comes to 2 and 36. That's how we got started.
When you started with that, or when you had that 0-26 last year, you were probably the guy that could look at some of these guys and go, no, it actually can get worse.
Well, that is true. That is true. And believe me, last year's Cavalier team, which I watched most of the time from a hospital bed, just was a lot better than that first-year Cavaliers team, without doubt.
There was some interesting stories, too. I want to say it was in the inaugural season. This is the one I've really been waiting to ask you about, because it's probably my favorite story, I guess, of a lot of the ones. I can't remember the name, and I don't have the book in front of me. The player that got cut from the Cavs because he was waiting in the hot dog line.
Yeah, Gary Suter.
And is he the same one that then went to a funeral home and called the entire... Could you go ahead and tell that story?
Well, Gary Suter was 6'9", 240 from Midwestern University of Texas, and when he was with us, he was tall, he was big, they could bounce off him in practice, but his talents were extremely limited, and he rarely got a chance to play, and he would beg Fitch to let him start, let him play, and Bill would say, remember, I see you play every day in practice, so there's no way I'm putting you in a game. And then finally we got all beat up with injuries right at the first of the year. We were playing up in Buffalo, and he decided, well, he was going to have to play Suter because everybody else was injured in that center spot. So he did indeed start Gary Suter, and when the pregame huddle was formed and the last-minute instructions handed out, Suter wasn't there. So they sent the team trainer back to the locker room to see if he was in there, and that's when Ron Culp, the trainer, found him standing at one of the concession stands with a hot dog in one hand and a beer in the other. Needless to say, Gary did not play that night and was placed on waivers.
I mean, guys, could you imagine that? Like, you're looking for your starting center, and he's in the concession stand.
Well, with a frame like that, 6'9", 270, I guess the guy was hungry.
What's the guy,
wow.
the big back guy from the late 80s Cavs? What was his name? Tip Kemper? Was that his name?
You thinking of Mel Turpin?
No, the guy that could eat a whole Big Mac in one bite. He played on those.
We had a lot of guys that could eat a Big Mac in one bite.
See, that's what makes Joe Tate the best right there. And you know what? I got to give you credit because not only in around that time, 1970, you're starting off with the Cavaliers in an expansion franchise and some low-level basketball for sure, but you got hit with the double whammy. Not that it was bad from your perspective, because around the same time, you also began your affiliation with the Cleveland Indians. I believe that started when the 3WE was bought by ERE, correct?
Well, it actually started the year before when Harry Jones, who was one of the TV announcers, had a heart attack, and Channel 8 asked me if I could fill in for him till he came back, and he actually didn't come back for the rest of the year, so I ended up doing TV baseball with Rocky Colavito on Channel 8. Then Nick Milletti bought the radio station and the Indians, and he put me in baseball on the radio side in 73 with Herb Score.
Now, not that it worked out that way financially for the Indians, but was that kind of progressive thinking around the time of the teams attempting to own their own radio stations to control their broadcast rights? Because we see that now with the big teams, of course,
having their
Indians,
exclusives.
Yankees, they all get their own networks now, but that seemed like pretty progressive thinking for the time, or am I wrong?
Well, I worked for the radio station, and the radio station paid my salary. It just happened that Nick Milletti owned both the radio station and the baseball team.
So it was more just worked out that way than,
Right.
than a grand plan. But that's okay, because sometimes that's how the best things happen. Now, obviously known for during your baseball time opening up every broadcast with "It's a Beautiful Day for Baseball," but there weren't a lot of beautiful days for baseball at that time for the Indians.
That's true. Now, I stole that from Bert Wilson, who was the longtime voice of the Chicago Cubs when I was growing up, and Bert Wilson was my favorite announcer, and so the two things I used, and I did it to salute Bert Wilson, was "It's a Beautiful Day for Baseball," and the other one was "Up on Your Feet for the Seventh Inning Stretch."
And you continued that basically throughout the 70s. Through 1979, I believe, you did both the Cavaliers and the Indians.
Right, yeah, and then switched over from radio to TV and continued both until 1987 was my last year, full year. I did a couple of games in 88 when they couldn't find anybody to fill in on the newly formed sports channel for the last two games of the season. I flew out to Seattle and sat in for those games with Rick Manning, and those were the actual last two Indians games I did until they brought me back, 2 years ago with Bruce Drennan for a kind of an old-timers broadcast, you might say, and Bruce and I did a game at the Progressive Field late in the season.
Well, actually, you worked with Bruce early on during your Indians days when he was I believe, just starting out, correct? And you were the one leading him through.
When I switched over to TV, I ended up doing 3 years with Bruce, 3 years with Reggie Rucker, and then 2 more years with Jack Corrigan, who has since gone on to be the play-by-play announcer for the Colorado Rockies.
What would be, I guess, if you could pick one, and I'm sure there's plenty, knowing the era that we're talking about in Cleveland Indians history, but what would be one of the stories that stands out to you from your days as an Indian, whether it involves a player or a coach or whatever?
Well, I had a chance to broadcast 3 no-hitters during my time with the Indians. I did Bosman in 1974 as he no-hit Oakland, the defending world champions. I did Lenny Barker's perfect game in 81 on my birthday of all times, and then also I was involved in broadcasting the Dennis Eckersley no-hitter against the California Angels.
Man,
wow.
That's some history.
I mean,
I'm just thinking of the time period. I actually feel bad. Joe, I mean, the Cavs, okay, you had the Miracle of Richfield, but man, those Indians teams were the dregs. I mean, they literally didn't contend for 30 years. I mean, and there's some interesting times. But, I mean, hey, that comes with it. You can't control the games. But you obviously went out of your way to make each and every Indians game, as rough as it might be, a pleasant experience for the listening audience.
Well, we had a good time, I'll say that. And working with Herb Score was really an education, because Herb was probably the most knowledgeable baseball man I ever met. And he was a good guy on top of that. So that was a very enjoyable 7 7-year span with Herb. And then Bruce and I had a lot of fun together. At times we were a two-man stand-up comedy team trying to cover up some really bad baseball. Reggie Rucker was an adventure because although he had played baseball at Boston U, he was a football player and had recently retired from the Browns, so it was interesting to work with him. And then Corrigan was the consummate pro.
Truly some memorable moments. I mean, the no-hitters, nickel beer night. I mean, these were just all parts of the storied career.
What are your memories of beer night?
I have tried to just wipe out all memories of beer night. It was without doubt the most disgusting time I ever spent in sports because of the way the whole thing just devolved into an absolute riot. And, it was a real black eye for the Cleveland Indians.
You know, somewhere around the early 80s, regardless of how much fun you personally were having and you and Bruce, things obviously got not so much fun for you on the basketball end because the era that created its own rule, actually, in the NBA, the Stipien era began. Obviously, that was probably, I would venture to say, your least enjoyable experiences with the Cavaliers franchise over the years?
Yeah, the time with Ted Stepien was not a lot of fun. He was with the team as owner for 3 years. I lasted 1 year, and then the radio station itself gave the broadcast rights back to the Cavaliers and to Stepien, and I had a financial settlement with the radio station and went on to broadcast a year with the New Jersey Nets, and then moved on to Chicago and did the Bulls for a year before coming back when Gordon Gund purchased the Cavaliers, and I rejoined the Cavs and was with them until I retired.
I think that's actually pretty interesting. When the Guns did buy the team, that was one of the main things when they were trying to figure out how to reestablish with the fan base and to reach out to you and bring you back. I think that was one of the keys to kind of signaling a fresh start, because it was like, hey, Joe, you know, a lot of people think Ted Stipien, among all the other retarded moves he made, fired you, but you actually walked. And so that was kind of a way to signal to the fans, hey, if Joe's coming back, maybe things are okay.
Well, I think that was certainly part of the reasoning behind bringing me back, and I, for one, regardless of whatever the reasons were, I was all for it. I had not left town during baseball because I was still doing the Indians, but it was nice to get back to Cleveland on a year-round basis.
Maybe just something a little off the wall, seeing as you've spent time in New Jersey and Chicago and Cleveland. How would you compare the fan bases of those teams? What was the atmosphere like being a part of three entirely different organizations?
Well, Chicago had really great fans when they were winning. And that could be said of any franchise. If you win, they will come. If you don't win, they won't.
Unless you're a Cleveland Browns fan.
Well, that's true. But
if you bought your season tickets while LeBron still played for the Cavs.
That is also true, yeah. But, New Jersey struggled mightily, and although the year I was there, they had a very good team, made the playoffs with a very young club, and that was an enjoyable experience. But maybe they get over to Brooklyn, why their best days will come attendance-wise, because they have not drawn well for, I think, forever in their time in New Jersey and the Meadowlands.
How do you feel looking...
real quick, Sean, because you asked about the different cities, but I kind of want to ask along that same vein, the different sports. You've done in Cleveland, you've done baseball, and you've done basketball. Was there a difference in your eyes of the Indians fan base and the Cavs fan base? Was one more passionate? However, would you see a difference in those two?
What, the Indians and the Cavalier fan base?
Yeah, at the time you were broadcasting both.
Well, I think the Indians had a long tradition, and it had some great baseball teams over the years. So if you want to rank them, I think the Browns were number one because this is a football town. The Indians number two because of their long and storied history. The Cavaliers were number three.
You mentioned that. Was there ever any consideration, I mean, maybe just behind the scenes or discussion or even thought on your end of doing anything with the Browns, seeing as how you had the other two teams covered?
No, never thought about it. There was never offered anything, although Art Modell at one point offered to take me to New York and introduce me to the folks at NBC and CBS because he said he felt that I could have handled network football on TV, and he'd back me on it 100%. So I was very, very honored by the suggestion, but I told him no. I was happy in Cleveland doing what I was doing. I had had a taste of network sports because of my involvement with the CBS Radio College Game of the Week. When I was working in Chicago, I also did that, and I wasn't very thrilled about network anything. So I thanked him, but did not